Hi guys, Buildzoid here, and today we're going to be doing another Buildzoid versus PC Partpicker video. Today I've kind of let myself go, and we're going to tone it down, okay? We're going to definitely tone it down. This build here is it's basically a build with a 3950X, and that's kind of it. Because the issue is the 3950X is almost a workstation CPU, but the thing, actually, it's a workstation CPU in my opinion. It's got way too many cores for any reasonable gaming application. Though I will say one funny thing about the 3950X is that since it does have so many bloody cores, if you disable the simultaneous multi-threading, you're still not going to lose a whole you're not going to lose a whole lot of multi-threaded performance, as in it's still going to be way faster than any other mainstream CPU. The 3900X with SMT enabled will probably be about as fast, but if you disable the SMT on a 3950X, it's still going to have a ton of multi-threaded performance, but more importantly, you're going to get a small boost to your single-threaded performance and a small increase in terms of maximum CPU clocks, because disabling SMT improves your worst-case scenario thermals. So if you wanted to run a 3950X in a sort of maximum single-threaded performance mode, disabling SMT would basically do that. And you'd still have a ton of multi-threaded performance because it's a freaking 16 core, right? Even if it's not running SMT, it's a freaking 16 core. It's got tons of multi-threaded performance for days. So, if you wanted a really illogical gaming build, that would actually be a totally viable way to run a 3950X. Anyway, so the build is basically a 3950X. We will be going through some motherboard options, memory kit options, and, not really GPU options, but, we'll talk a little bit about GPUs and about the power supply. The thing is, on a build like this, the power supply really, you wouldn't really want to go below, $100 power supply anyway. And this one at 144 is, ridiculously nice. So that's why I went for this one, yeah. Anyway, right now the build is almost $3,000, and we've got the 3950X. We've also got the usual placeholder parts, right? Which is the 1TB SSD, Crucial MX500 SSD, and I call these, and then of course the Fractal Design Focus G case, because the thing is just this way I get to call it a build, because honestly I believe most people, all most people care about in these videos from me is actually my selection of motherboard, RAM, and that's it. Probably everything else doesn't matter. But the thing is the thing is, cases in my opinion are just too subjective for me to recommend a case. This is definitely not a bad case, but it's there might be other, you might want something specific from your case that this doesn't do, in which case, sure, replace it, whatever. This is here to just sort of be a case. It's not here for any super particular reason. It's a good case, and it's cheap, and that's why it's in the list. And the same goes for the Crucial 1TB SSD. Is just it's an SSD, it's 1TB, and it's pretty cheap. And I can't be bothered to do research into M.2 SSDs that are good at this price point, right? That's basically it. I know for a fact that this is a decent SSD, and I don't know for a fact that some other M.2 SSD at the same price point is equally good, and I can't really be bothered doing a bunch of research on that. So that's why that ends up in here. I wouldn't take my own advice on SSD purchases. If you want a better SSD, go for it. Go find reviews of SSDs and read those before changing the selection. So let's talk about the build. So we have the 3950X. Then for the heatsink, I went with the Noctua NHD15S, and I went with the NHD15S because it has the improved memory clearance. That's basically it. Though ultimately that doesn't actually matter that much, because I ended up going with 2x16 memory kits for the entire build. So at one point during the process, I was we could go for a 4x8. At the same time, this thing has plenty of cooling performance, and it's also not the most expensive dual tower out there. So that's why it goes in. That's why it ended up in the build. Dual tower air coolers offer a ridiculous amount of cooling performance, and yeah, I'm honestly I prefer air cooling AIOs are a like AIOs are nice and convenient, but for like a daily build that's not going to move very much, I really don't see a point in going with an AIO over an air cooler, especially if you have a CPU that's not going to be outputting more than like 250 watts of heat. Because that's around where air coolers stop like being viable. Is like once you start going into like the 300 to 400 watt range, you're looking at like, well, AIOs also start having major issues at that point, but it's like at that point you really want like a custom loop, but we're not at that point with this build. A 3950X is just like it does run hot and it can pull a lot of power, but pushing it all the way to 300 watts is just not really something that you'd want to be doing anyway. So for that reason, you know, I'm just like, yeah, let's go with the $73 dual tower air cooler, because it's going to get you basically the same performance as an AIO while being significantly cheaper. And that's kind of why I went for it. Though, yeah, and AIOs have advantages if you have like a build that moves around a lot, or if you replace CPUs a lot, much more convenient to mount and unmount and that kind of thing. So that's like my favorite thing about AIOs is they're easy to swap, right? Because for test bench use. But in my daily system, I have an air cooler. So it's kind of that. Because performance-wise, air cooling is still really, really good. So especially once you get the big dual towers. And something like the D15S actually goes out of its way to actually not cause all of the like there's some air coolers out there where if you install them, it'll like interfere with GPUs. Though that's more of like an HEDT issue than like on depends on the motherboard if it'll interfere with the GPU. And then of course they'll interfere with memory sticks. This one very specifically doesn't. So yeah, that's how it ended up in the build. So next we have the motherboard. So for the motherboard, there's tons of options. There's so many options, but for the full price version of the build, right, like the expensive version of the build, I went with the Gigabyte X570 RS Master because the rear IO is really good. You get 5 gig LAN, 1 gig LAN. The 5 gig is real. Wait, I think actually I can't remember what the 5 gig is, but the 1 gig is Intel. I think the 5 gig is Realtek. You get a bunch of USB ports. You get you get BIOS flashback functionality, clear CMOS button as well. The board has dual BIOS. You've got a postcode. You've got a power button, reset button. It's got all the overclocking features. You get 6 SATA ports, 3 M.2 slots. Like it has everything. It literally has everything you could possibly want from a board. The VRM is really, really good as well. Yeah, like. They're like that's why like it's just a really, really great board all around. But it is expensive, and there are definitely cheaper motherboards that'll run a 3950X just fine and also overclock the CPU just fine. So alternative options: MSI Meg X570 Unify. This is $300. Like the VRM. It's interesting. Thermally, the VRM on this actually should be better, but the thing is, this is a 12-phase using doublers, whereas the Gigabyte Master doesn't use any doublers. So voltage regulation-wise, the Master should have an advantage. Also, the rear I/O on this is inferior as you go from, you know, like the Master has more USB ports, and the Master also has a 5 gig and a 1 gig, whereas this is just 2.5 gig LAN. So the networking on this is also weaker than on the Master, but you still have the power button, reset button, and the postcode. You just lose things like, you also lose the dual BIOS. So you kind of lose a bunch, like you lose a few features, you lose some rear I/O, you lose 2 SATA ports. So this only has 4 SATA ports, which kind of, this is like my main concern with this motherboard. But a lot of people, you know, you'd probably be using the M.2 slots. So good alternative option to the Master. Now, if you think this is kind of not great because of the SATA port situation, then also you get clear CMOS and a BIOS flashback on the rear I/O of this board as well. So yeah, but if you think that this just not enough SATA ports and that's not okay, then another alternative is the ASRock X570 Taichi. So this is just a straight downgrade in the VRM department from both the Unify and the Master. However, you get more SATA ports, you get, you know, and then you get all of the overclocking features that you'd get on the other two boards. So you still have BIOS flashback, you still have a clear CMOS button in the rear I/O. Instead of 2.5 gig Realtek, like this has 2.5 gig Realtek, this has 1 gig Intel. So the networking got slower, but it's Intel, so you might find that it has like better software support in some ways. Anyway, you get more, like USB port situation is just basically just as bad as it is on the Unify. Yeah, but you still have BIOS flashback, you still have a postcode, you still have the power button, reset button. So you basically still have all of the overclocking features that the master would have. It's just that the VRM's gotten a downgrade. I'd also expect the Tai Chi to be inferior to the Unify in terms of memory overclocking. Already in my, like, I do have a Tai Chi and I've messed around with memory overclocking quite a bit, and it doesn't seem to be the strongest board I've tested. So yeah, I've not gotten around to testing the Unify yet, but I would be very surprised if the Unify wasn't better at memory overclocking. But the thing is, in day-to-day usage, that is not really a priority to me, because here's the thing. Like a couple hundred, like one tick of any timing, in terms of memory overclocking is just not that much of a difference in day-to-day usage. It's a big deal if you're running benchmarks where 1% can make the difference between beating someone and not beating someone. But if you're just doing daily, then it's like 1% performance differences just kind of don't matter. So, the fact that this is slightly inferior in memory overclocking, I don't really think is a good argument for the fact that is significant enough to counteract the fact that this is just more, this is a more flexible board because it's got more SATA ports, right? Then again, this kind of has a networking advantage with the 2.5 gig Realtek, for at least raw speed, right? That's the thing, is my problem with Realtek LAN is not that it's slow, it's that it's just my experience with it is that it's unreliable, in that it doesn't really like being run 24/7. So, which is kind of a word, that's borderline server, that's borderline server expectations, but I don't know. It's just yeah, so it's kind of that. Anyway, so if you regularly restart your system, that's not really a concern. Anyway, so, these are the sort of if you want basically a master, but you if you want overclocking features, then these are the two other options compared to the master. Next option, I consider at $250, I consider the next option to be the Asus ROG Strix X570i. And the reason why this board specifically is because a lot of the other $250 boards just kind of aren't very impressive in terms of feature set to me. And this has a really great VRM. In terms of memory overclocking, this thing actually should beat everything else just because it's an ITX with 2 DIMMs. Yeah, so this is a great little motherboard. Obviously, you lose all of the overclocking features. Instead of a postcode, you just get 4 color-coded LEDs, and that's it. There's no buttons. You do still have BIOS flashback, but there's no power button, reset button. So test bench use is going to be kind of wild. It's not meant for test bench use. And obviously, this is in the same situation as the Unify in terms of SATA ports, where it's only got 4 of them. But here, this is an ITX board, so what do you expect? Yeah, if you don't mind the restricted I/O, then this is also a really good option. So this saves you another $100, you can go down another $100 from the master. So this is another alternative in terms of motherboards. And then the next option in terms of motherboards is the X570 Aorus Elite from Gigabyte. You basically get the same VRM you'd get on the Tai Chi, except this board, so, this is like a $200 board, and you get this rear I/O, so you still have the same sort of, I think it's the same number of USB ports. Okay, so you lose the Type-C compared to the master, but other than that, you have the same number of USB ports. It still has BIOS flashback, but there's absolutely no troubleshooting features for overclocking. There's no LEDs, there's nothing. So overclocking on this thing might be a little bit of a pain. But other than that, also it's a single BIOS board, but the only dual BIOS board we've looked at is the master, so, that's kind of that. But yeah, this is an option, this will run a 3950X just fine. It's just yeah, so if you want a cheap board, this is the option. If you want to go even cheaper, there's the Asus Tough Gaming, which, it's not much cheaper. It's about $20 cheaper at the cheapest. But yeah, if you want to go a bit cheaper, then you can go for this. And interestingly enough, this actually has a memory overclocking advantage over the Elite. Again, it's not a very significant advantage, but it does have one. This does have some troubleshooting features. It has, debug LEDs, but there's no BIOS flashback functionality on this. So if you brick the BIOS, you're very screwed. If you want to, well, the thing is, if you the other reason, like the other issue with not having dual BIOS is that if you're, I mean, BIOS flashback is that if you're going to be installing like a 4000 series CPU and you don't already have a 3000 series CPU in the motherboard, you're not going to be able to update the BIOS because you need a CPU to update the BIOS with. So that's kind of the, but the thing is, in the context of a build that you're doing right now with a 3950X, that is a completely irrelevant consideration, right? Like the main advantage to the BIOS flashback is that you can sometimes recover bricked BIOSes with it. So yeah, honestly, I don't really consider that a big downside with this board, like not having the BIOS flashback. So yeah, and in terms of VRM, interestingly enough, this is a very similar VRM design to what you'd get on the Elite, except this one actually does a better job in terms of voltage regulation. So in terms of overclocking, this might actually do a little bit better. Thermally, it's about the same, but slightly better voltage regulation because Asus kind of go like the whole we don't run doublers. Well, here it's like they're putting 3 power stages in each phase, so this is still a 4-phase, but it actually works really really well, because like you've just got so many power. Like the thing is, you get the voltage regulate. Like yeah, basically this works out really well. I'm not going to go into the details of it, details of why it works well, but this does actually work really well. The one downside with this motherboard is I'm not really a fan of the rear I/O. I mean, you do get a Type-C, but the overall number of USB ports is lower. This LAN instead, like, so Gigabyte has 1 gig Intel. This is 1 gig Realtek. And, yeah, that's basically it. Now, I do think, oh yeah, but the Elite has 6 SATA ports, whereas this has 8. So that's kind of the thing. Depending on what you're going for, you know, this might be the better option, or this is the better option. So yeah, pick your own poison here. But this one's also slightly cheaper sometimes. But either of those are like solid options as motherboards. So what I want to do is also like show the lowest possible cost version of this build, but so we will throw the tough in there eventually. Anyway, next up, the memory kit. So for the memory, I went with this GSkill kit right here. It's pretty damn expensive at $300, but this is B-die and it's 3600 CL16, so it's like it's a decent, like it's one of the highest bins you can get for 2x16 actually. There are some higher bins, but they're ridiculously expensive past this point, and so I really don't see that as being worth it. It's a 1.35 volts. I went specifically for 2x16 because every single one of these motherboards uses a daisy chain topology. So this is a daisy chain, that's a daisy chain, this is also a daisy chain. And I know a lot of people might be like, wait, what? Because I did a PCB breakdown a while ago for Gamers Nexus where I said this motherboard is a T topology. Well, what happened with that is that the motherboard I did a video about for Gamers Nexus was an engineering sample with a T topology layout, and then the retail board gets a daisy chain. So this is a daisy chain. This is an ITX board, so T topology and daisy chain are irrelevant. It's an ITX. You can't run a 4x8 configuration on it anyway. This is a daisy chain. This is also a daisy chain, and this is not a motherboard. That's a GPU. So basically, 2x16 is the way to go for the best memory overclocking experience, which is why I went with a 2x16, 3600 CL16 B-die memory kit. It is very important that you get 16, 16, 16 timings and not 16, 19, 19, 39. That you don't get this. This is a lot cheaper, but the reason why this is a lot cheaper is this is probably going to be Hynix CJR or DJR, and it's just not going to perform the same as like if you actually manually overclock your memory, this is going to perform significantly worse than the 3600 16, 16, 16, 36 memory kit. So that's kind of the main difference there. Though, admittedly, this price point is not like, well, it's not like, it's a decent, like, as far as memory kits go, it's actually not a terrible option. That didn't work. There we go. So this is not like a terrible option in terms of alternative memory kits, but other alternatives. So this is the cheapest 2x16 kit of B-die that I managed to find. This is 3200 CL14. It should still be able to hit roughly the same clocks as this. Actually, exactly the same clocks. It's just in terms of timings, you might find some differences. At the same time, 3200 CL14 and 3600 CL16 are such like general bins that like neither of these is particularly difficult, that it's like honestly, if you tested 10 of these and tested 10 of these, you might find that they like overclock basically the same, and this one's quite a bit cheaper. Right, so this is like a cheaper memory kit option. Then, of course, you could also go for this as a cheaper memory kit option, right? This saves you another, what is it, like $60. But the thing is, at this point, you're looking at like Hynix CJR or DJR, and at that point, I'd say you could also consider Micron Rev E, because Micron Rev E gets even cheaper, right? You're down to $145 for 32 gigs. And, well, the disadvantage is basically TRCD and like in terms of primary timings, Rev E for Micron is basically the same thing as CJR and DJR, but the CJR, actually, I'm not sure that this can be DJR, but CJR at the very least, which this is standard timing for CJR at the, like this is a standard set of timings for CJR, as well as Rev E. I'm not sure if GSkill uses Rev E though yet. But anyway, the thing with CJR is it does slightly tighter TRFC, and it basically does the same timings everywhere else as Rev E does. So CJR is basically slightly faster than Rev E. So this is going to be slightly better performance, or if you're lazy and you don't want to deal with manual overclocking, well, this has an XMP profile that actually defaults you to the like 3600, 16, 1919. So if you just want to fire and forget your XMP, this is a really good option. If you want to do some manual overclocking and just get your memory as cheap as possible, this is the best option. Well, okay, no, you can get even cheaper 32 gig kits, but at that point you're looking at memory kits where because the thing is with Crucial, if you get a memory kit with the AES partner, like AES in the part number, you're guaranteed Micron Rev E. With a lot of other vendors like Team Group, GSkill, or Corsair, if you buy something like a 3000 megahertz CL16 or CL15 memory kit, the memory chips you're going to get are going to be basically everything under the sun. And the problem with getting everything under the sun is that they behave vastly differently. You could even end up with something like Hynix AFR, and AFR sucks. So you really don't want to end up with a kit of AFR. Like, it's just not going to go very far. So that's kind of the thing, is just like that's why I specifically go for this kit, because yeah, you could get something cheaper, but at that point you're just kind of playing the lottery on what memory chips you're actually going to get, and a lot of the memory chips out there suck. So this is the best way to get something like Rev E is not the strongest memory chip out there, but it's still a lot better than something like AFR or MFR or C-Die, Samsung C-Die I'd actually avoid as well, right? So that's kind of the reasoning for why I chose this. So this would be the like cheap memory option for the build. And then in terms of the GPU, I actually found a review of this thing. It doesn't suck, surprisingly. Like this actually has a pretty decent heatsink. So that's why it ended up in the build. It's also not the most expensive 2080 Ti out there, and you can get the cheapest 2080 Ti you can get is like $1,050. So I think it's a decent it's a decent trade to get. Like the issue is I can't find reviews for the other 2080 Ti's. Like the even cheaper 2080 Ti's, I can't really find reviews for them. So yeah, this one, because I can find a review confirming that the heatsink on this actually works, whereas with the other one, it's like I'm not actually sure if it's worth it. Yeah. And if you wanted a better 2080 Ti, I'd go for the Asus Strix. There's obviously also 2080 Ti's like the Kingpin Edition and the Hall of Fame. But, well, I mean, if you want to go for those, go for them. But, you know, like, I think they would just unnecessarily inflate the price of the build, right? And the performance difference between one 2080 Ti and another 2080 Ti is, again, just a couple percentage points. So I don't really like that, you know. It's annoying when you're losing to somebody in Firestrike. It really doesn't matter if you're actually playing games that, you know, you're 2 or 3% behind. Well, even 5%. You're just not going to notice that, right? So that's kind of the thing. And this card is like, you know, like this basically has one of the best PCBs you can get on a 2080 Ti, and it doesn't cost an insane amount of money. Also, the heatsink on this thing is really, really good. So yeah, that's why, like, this is the expensive option for the 2080 Ti in my opinion. So let's see the downcosted version of this build. And actually, I should have had the Strix in the build to start with. Just add that. So yeah, with the Strix, the build is a little over $3,000. And now let's do the low cost version, just for comparison's sake. Because like this version right here, it's not very cost effective. It's not supposed to be. It's just supposed to be nice. And yeah, so you could go for like a 2,000, like, yeah. So this would be like the downcosted version. That's not as much of a price difference as I thought it would be. Well, as I was kind of hoping for. And yeah, at this point you could maybe shave off another $50 on the power supply, but I don't really see the point of, going that far. I guess the issue is like the 2080 Ti and the CPU just make up so much of the total price that like tweaking things like the motherboard and the memory just doesn't really make that much of a difference. But yeah, so the power supply. Well, I went for this because there's really not that many better options. Like I went through I went through a couple of reviews of other power supplies, and the thing is just like you basically get the same performance at the same price point. That's basically it. Or you get worse power supplies that are slightly cheaper. And it's just like, and it's not a significant downgrade, but it's just like, this is a really, really nice power supply built by Delta, who don't really build that many consumer PSUs, because they mostly they actually only do server hardware, except for the Antec high current platinum series power supplies. And so the interesting thing with this power supply is that it is a multi-rail design, but each of the rails has like a 40 amp OCP, so it's not really like as... And also I think they have like a rail per connector, so it's basically impossible to hit the OCP, because if you have a GPU with two 8-pins, or even an 8-pin and a 6-pin, and you plug them in, like the power supply is going to have a 40 amp OCP per connector. So... and the OCP basically, well, like multi-rail power supply, like multi-rail OCP like this, basically is just an extra safety feature with the PSU. So that's kind of why I really like this series of power supplies for daily builds. It's just like there's a problem if your multi-rail PSU has an OCP of like 20 amps per rail, because your GPU is going to be potentially tripping and it's going to be causing all kinds of issues. But at 40 amps per rail, like, yeah, you're not going to trip it. Like, it's not the problem. So, like, you're not going to trip it in like a day-to-day usage scenario. So there's really no downside. There's really no downside to having a multi-rail PSU if the OCP is actually at like a reasonable level, like it is with these. And then in terms of ripple and like transient response and voltage regulation and efficiency, this thing's on par with everything else in the price range, unless I missed something. But yeah, so that's how this PSU ended up in the build, because it's a really solid power supply. So, yeah, I guess if you went for the cheapest possible 2080 Ti, you could knock this down to $2,500. Right? Check off. There we go. And... yeah, so you can knock it down to just over $2,500 if you go with the absolutely cheapest 2080 Ti you can get. And I guess I could also like get it down cost the SSD a bit at this point, but anyway, so that's kind of that for this PC part picker video. Is just like, yeah, the thing is like this whole build to me just kind of looks like a really overpriced gaming build. But again, like, I don't build workstations, so I just don't know what the criteria, the criteria for a workstation would be. And I guess if you just do, something where you just need a lot of CPU power, this actually works out for you just fine, because you have a 3950X, you got all the CPU power you need. But, yeah, that's kind of the thing. I don't do workstations, so I don't know I don't really know for sure how well this does as a workstation configuration. Because I'd assume there's a lot of situations where you might need like a ton of PCIe or a ton of RAM, and well, this isn't a ton of RAM. This is just 32 gigs. But yeah, if like this is kind of like this is basically what I would go for if I was like upgrading my daily system, something like this, and assuming I didn't have a budget limit, because realistically I wouldn't upgrade my daily system. So, yeah, so. That's kind of it. that's my thoughts on a 3950X build. And of course, you could also replace the 3950X with like a 3900X, and you can replace the GPU with another 20, like a 2080 Super or something, or whatever. But it's just like with the 3950X, it's just like I don't actually know what kind of GPU you would be going for. So I just kind of went for the only thing I do know, and it's like overpriced gaming build. That's what we're doing. So, yeah, that's it for the video. Thanks for watching. Like, share, subscribe. Oh, actually, I should mention the upgrade path, I guess, before we end. So you might be wondering, like, okay, so this is like the cheap option. What would be the upgrade path if I didn't want to? Like, what should you upgrade? Like, motherboard or memory first? Well, actually, you should upgrade the memory first, right? Like, upgrade the memory first, because upgrading the motherboard does not make it doesn't make your system faster. It just makes it less annoying to overclock, basically. Right? Like that's kind of the thing. As your motherboard gets cheaper, the amount of skill / patience that you need to do your overclocking increases, because the more expensive motherboards, they're better at overclocking. It's kind of the thing. Which is kind of funny, is like if you buy a really cheap motherboard, it requires more skill to get anywhere with, because it just sucks so badly. Yeah, that's kind of the thing. So I wouldn't start with upgrading the motherboard here. I would first upgrade the memory kit, and once you hit like I wouldn't necessarily go all the way up to the Neo kit before I started upgrading the motherboard. Like, as soon as you hit this one, like once you hit this memory kit, I'd start going up in the motherboard tiers, right? Maybe up to like the Taichi or the Unify. And then once you get to like the Unify, well, actually you could go all the way up to the Gigabyte one. There's really not like, I really don't expect there to be too much of a difference between these two memory kits. On the other hand, like the difference between this kit and this kit is very significant in terms of actual overclocking performance. And the same goes for that Crucial kit, right? Like the difference between this, and this, there's some pretty major differences there. Between this and this, though, they're both B-die, so they're going to behave very similarly. So at this point, it's just like, yeah, like this is a very minor upgrade. Whereas with the motherboard, so, once you get to this, that's when I'd start upgrading the motherboards. Unless there's some specific feature that you desire that, the really cheap motherboards don't have. Like, I don't know, a postcode. Yeah, postcode would probably be the one, and it's like you can already get the postcode on $300 boards. So that's kind of that. And then I wouldn't really like, there's nothing else really in this build you would change, right? Like, so yeah, that's kind of that. That's it for the video. So thanks for watching. Like, share, subscribe, leave any comments, questions, suggestions down in the comment section below. And if you'd like to support what I do here with actually hardcore overclocking, I do have a Patreon where you can support me directly. There's a link to that down in the description below. And if you don't like Patreon, there's also the HOC Teespring store where you can pick up shirts, stickers, posters, the usual YouTuber type YouTuber merch. So if you'd like to support me through that instead, there's a link to that down in the description as well. Both of them help out immensely with running the channel. And yeah, that's it for the video. So thanks for watching, and goodbye.